My father-in-law, Andrew, indirectly addresses me with a mutter, his gaze averted, indicating we haven't finished moving in. Despite not using names, it's evident he's speaking to me, employing his typically haughty tone as if he's the center of the universe. I've tolerated his behavior until now, but my patience has reached its limit. I cease cleaning the table and fix Andrew with a stare, even though he avoids my gaze. I will leave by today, I declare, and Andrew chuckles with apparent pleasure, calling me a parasite and trash, looking forward to my departure as if it will cleanse him. He seems to believe everything will revert to normal, failing to recognize how much his life has evolved over time. I am Leona, 39, married to Peter, and we reside with his parents. Our marriage has lasted several years without children, and we've decided against having any, realizing early on it wasn't possible due to Peter's infertility, a fact disclosed only after our marriage registration, shattering my dreams of a family with children, despite our discussions and plans for our future offspring. This revelation felt like the deepest betrayal by Peter, whom I trusted wholeheartedly. Though some might opt for immediate divorce upon such discovery, severing ties wasn't straightforward for me, having committed to integrating with Peter's family, who became our sole parental figures. Faced with the expectation of children, we disclosed our situation to the in-laws, attributing the issue to me to avoid blaming Peter. Upon learning we couldn't conceive, the in-laws, led by Andrew, were incensed, labeling me worthless and demanding my departure, relegating me to a servant-like existence. From my entry into their home, dignity was denied to me, my presence diminished to less than human. Meals were consumed alone, relegating me to cleaning up after the family's feast, never enjoying a fulfilling meal myself, which led to a noticeable decline in my health and appearance. Initially, Andrew's disdain was directed at his wife, Georgia, but soon, I became his primary target. After joining the family, Georgia seemed much happier. She's been smiling a lot more lately. Peter mentioned that she must feel relieved not being the target anymore. Indeed, she never smiles around Andrew, but I've seen her smile when she's talking with Peter. Andrew's tyranny didn't end there. Once he discovered we couldn't have children, he demanded I work from dawn until dusk. Since you're inadequate as a woman, at least make yourself useful around the house, he declared. I had always planned to work even after getting married, and I was eager to leave the house as soon as possible. Waking up early for chores, sending everyone off, and then heading to work was challenging, but my job's flexible hours allowed me to adjust my schedule to ensure I was home before the rest. Despite arriving home early and completing my chores, I never dined with the family or received praise for my cooking. Andrew, in particular, would often discard my meals without tasting them, claiming they looked unappetizing. Neither Peter nor Georgia ever voiced any complaints or offered any feedback. Even when I voiced my frustrations from the kitchen, meal times remained silent, devoid of conversation. I wondered if they actually enjoyed eating in silence, while I could only observe them in quiet resignation. I had no choice but to maintain a cordial relationship with my in-laws, assuming the role of a compliant wife. The purpose behind this facade was unclear, but as an orphan, the idea of divorce felt like an insurmountable burden. Then Andrew demanded I contribute my entire earnings to the household. While I was willing to share a portion of my salary for living expenses, Andrew's demand was excessive. What was the point of working if I couldn't decide how my earnings were spent? However, protesting was futile, Andrew's decisions were final, and opposition would only exacerbate matters. Compliance was simpler, keeping Andrew content and sparing me the sorrow of witnessing Georgia and Peter's dejected expressions. Ultimately, the root of my marital distress was Andrew. Georgia and Peter were minor concerns compared to the oppression and torment inflicted by Andrew. Initially, Georgia managed the household finances, but that responsibility was transferred to me upon marriage. At first glance at the household ledger, I was astounded, but over time, I adapted. Perhaps Andrew's financial recklessness increased with an additional income, justifying his expenditures as business-related, increasing his nights out. The three of them, excluding me, began taking trips on long weekends, a new development in their routine. Despite these changes, Andrew never acknowledged me as part of the family, instead labeling me a parasite or trash. As a housekeeper who cost nothing, I accepted my role through my 20s and 30s, finding solace in the relative peace it brought. When Andrew wasn't around, I found some relief, but as I neared 40, my tolerance for Andrew's behavior vanished. Listening and silently complying felt foolish and tiresome. Losing my fear of him, I began to speak up. This defiance was not well received, leading to a growing resentment from him. Our relationship deteriorated significantly, with communication almost non-existent. On the rare occasions Andrew spoke, it was solely to criticize me, and I retorted, making our home atmosphere unbearable. It escalated to him demanding I leave the house, but I refused to accept his orders passively. "Where do you expect me to go, knowing I have no parents?" I would snap back each time. Andrew, in frustration, would slam his glass on the table so frequently that I lost count of the broken glasses. "Why should I have to think about that? A woman like you shouldn't talk back to me," he'd argue. Georgia and Peter, sensing an impending outburst, would leave the room, leaving the stage to Andrew. "You don't appreciate being allowed to stay in this house. Don't get too arrogant, you parasite," he'd rant, his face redder than when drunk. We had this argument countless times, and I was exhausted from being shouted at. Usually, I'd capitulate and apologize, "I'm sorry." But that day, I refused to back down. "You better stop talking like that, Andrew. You're not getting any younger, you should start calming down," I countered sharply, surprising Andrew with my defiance. "Who do you think you're talking to? I am the master of this house. A wife like you shouldn't have opinions," he bellowed. Despite knowing I had gone too far, I couldn't hold back my years of pent-up frustration. "Isn't it time I'm treated like a human? You're retired now, with less income." "Looks like the tables are turning," I argued. The confrontation escalated, with Andrew grabbing me by the collar, declaring, "A person like you isn't needed in my house. I don't want to see your face anymore. Pack your things and leave right now," he yelled, his voice so loud that the furniture seemed to tremble. Instead of apologizing, I stood my ground. "Fine, you want me to leave. That'll make you happy, right?" I retorted, looking down. "Yes," he spat back, unable to conceal his contempt. "Then I'll do it," I declared. He stormed off to his room, leaving behind a mess in the living room, which I began to clean. Georgia checked on me, concerned, but left without a word, returning to her own space. It was clear I no longer had a place in this house, neither Peter nor Georgia would stand up for me. My years of endurance had finally boiled over, leaving me feeling even more isolated. The next day, I resumed my routine as usual. Andrew woke up, came into the living room, and nonchalantly spread the newspaper on the sofa, completely ignoring my presence. Then he asked, without looking, "Finished moving yet?" There was no way I could have moved out so soon after yesterday's events. I didn't even think he was serious. I thought it was just a drunken outburst, not something he meant. "This is about leaving the house, right? When will you leave? You have no right to live here anymore." Even as he spoke, Andrew never looked at me. I stopped wiping the table and turned to face Andrew. If he was serious about wanting me to leave, then I would respond seriously. "I'll be out by today." Georgia, who was listening nearby, freezes, her worried gaze falling on me. It's clear that once I leave, Georgia will become the target again, and she doesn't want me to go. But Andrew insists, "Leave." So, though I have no choice, more precisely, the option to apologize and continue living here was never there, Andrew laughs loudly, likely satisfied that he's getting his way. I rush out of the living room, quickly pack my things, and leave the in-laws' house. I haven't decided where to go, but I feel liberated. I send a message to Peter, who was already out, "Please divorce me. A lawyer will contact you." Then I turn off my phone. Over the next few days, I find a lawyer and have them contact Peter and the in-laws. Andrew, thinking divorce was inevitable, pressured Peter into signing the divorce papers quickly. Peter kept looking between me and the divorce papers, but there was no room for second thoughts. Andrew was insisting, and I had no intention of returning. "I don't have money to give to a woman like you, but dealing with lawyers is a hassle, so I'll pay," Andrew grumbles, not even paying with his own money but arrogantly looking down on me. The lawyer smiles wryly at this. Peter seems reluctant to pay but signs the agreement under Andrew's glare. I sign in front of the lawyer, and the divorce is finalized. We complete the distribution of property, and I can claim a settlement for Andrew's harassment I had recorded. It was worth paying for a lawyer instead of fighting alone. Andrew, caring about his public image, avoids any complications by involving lawyers. I managed the household finances, so I knew exactly how much money Andrew had. That's why I was able to suggest an amount he could just about afford. With the property distribution and harassment settlement paid in full, I started a comfortable life in my apartment. I used to hate being alone before marriage, but after living with the in-laws and getting divorced, I've come to cherish my own time. I cook meals for myself, enjoying the peace without anyone complaining. One day, about 3 months after the divorce, Andrew calls repeatedly. Assuming it's nothing good, I don't answer, but he's persistent. While fiddling with my phone, I accidentally answer. "What have you done to my house?" I instinctively move the phone away from my ear, his voice so loud even without speaker mode. "What do you mean?" "I haven't done anything. I just left the house like you said." But Andrew isn't satisfied with my answer and continues yelling. "How can you say you've done nothing? Why am I getting notifications that withdrawals can't be made since you left?" So he's upset because he's been notified about issues with withdrawals and thinks it's my fault. I don't know. I didn't add anything. I managed everything as you instructed and paid everything due. I start to enjoy realizing why Andrew is angry. My grin widens, glad he's not here to see it. "That's impossible. Before you came, we managed with mine, George's, and Peter's salaries. How much were you earning anyway?" I remember I never showed Andrew my salary details. $45,000 take home. Andrew makes a sound like a squashed frog and then falls silent. In fact, my job is in sales at an investment trust company. Most of my salary was commission-based, dependent on how much return I could generate for investors. But much of it vanished due to Andrew's extravagant spending. However, I had invested the inheritance from my parents, which brought in some income. It wasn't much, but it helped with living expenses. I used that income to buy things I needed, but the distribution of property only involved Peter's savings. This was because only the shared property acquired during our marriage was eligible, so the inheritance from my parents and its earnings were not part of the distribution. Since I had used all earnings during the marriage for living expenses, I had no savings. These years, the Andrew family spent money like water without knowing I was compensating for it. "You said you managed before marriage, but was it the same standard of living?" As I pressed on, Andrew finally began to get angry. "Don't joke. Then keep contributing money to our house. You're the one who ruined it, so you should take responsibility." I couldn't help but laugh at Andrew's absurd words. I could see Andrew's face turning red and yelling, "What's wrong? What are you talking about? You told me to leave, remember? I did just that. Why should I, no longer a family member, give you money?" I answered, half laughing, and then heard something break on the other end. Andrew must have thrown another tantrum. The thought that I no longer needed to clean up after him made me even wish he would break more. Besides, we're strangers now, not family, not anything. Please don't act like family now. Manage your own finances. I left you just enough to live, right? With that, I said goodbye and hung up. I expected more calls, but none came. I thought maybe he was remorseful, but apparently, that wasn't the case. Perhaps he felt ashamed of not being able to make payments, ordering Peter and Georgia to borrow money from financial institutions to cover the costs. Payments were made, but it led to debt repayments. Unwilling to change their lifestyle, they continued living as when I was there. If you live like that, you won't be able to make regular payments or repay your debts. Unable to meet regular payments and debt repayments, they accumulated more debt every month. I heard about this when Peter contacted me, pathetically considering reconciliation. Moreover, Peter. I'm severing my connection with Dad, suggesting we reunite, but how is that possible when he never defended me from Andrew's mistreatment? Despite my decision to stay with Peter, aware that we couldn't conceive, he never stood by me. There's no chance I'll go back to him. He may have felt overwhelmed by Andrew, but that's not my problem anymore. I hope they come to understand the consequences of their actions and face hardships. Currently, the in-laws are burdened with debt yet refuse to adjust their lifestyle. Andrew, now employed on a contractual basis with diminished pay, and both Georgia and Peter have taken up part-time jobs in security. It's not only Andrew, Georgia and Peter are equally stubborn, unwilling to compromise their standard of living despite reaching their financial limits. My priority was once safeguarding Peter, but now, at 40, I prioritize my own well-being. Although starting a family may present challenges, I'm receptive to the idea. Life before the divorce felt burdensome every morning, but now, I awaken invigorated, optimistic about the prospects of my renewed existence.